Well, it's certainly been a windy week, if you know what I mean, here in Kyoto.
Blowing like crazy as it blows autumn weather in. Yeah.
The autumn weather's been blowing in, and so have the tunes. We have a lot of wind. We have a wind theme this week, with wind instruments. It's about to, and I have to say, we should probably do more of these, because I had a really great listening week this week. I liked everything I heard. In fact, I kind of want to stop the podcast right now and go listen to the 3 classical recordings that I selected once more.
You were blown away.
Going to do that.
I was blown away.
Tunes. That's right. By this music. I liked it. I wasn't. I don't know about that, but it was. I was pretty much high as a kite all week, and not because of any external substances. It was because there was just all this music in my mind. It was really good. I liked it a lot. Anyway, listeners, you're in for a treat this week if you actually go and listen to the links that we leave. I mean, you're also going to probably hear us talk for almost 2 hours. I hope you enjoy that too. But the music's a lot better.
Yes, we've got a woodwind extravaganza and our usual blowhard bloviation exposition of such works on this episode 33 of Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind, brought to you from our exclusive location in Western Japan, where the autumn weather has come in suddenly.
Suddenly, like it always does.
The first podcast where I don't have my air conditioner on in the background, and it's actually getting a bit chilly.
Yeah, in fact, I have long sleeves today for the first time, since we started this podcast, really.
That's right.
And still don't have the heater on, but that's coming shortly, I think. Yeah,
that's coming up. On this mic here is one of your hosts, Russ, and on that mic is Mike over there.
Is Mike. Mike is on the mic, as the Beastie Boys used to say.
Mike is on the mic.
Mike on the mic. Yeah.
And we're going to bring you a wind-centered episode. But before we get into the classical section, I want to remind our listeners, as we mentioned, the links that you'll find in the episode description to everything we'll discuss. You'll find links to Spotify and Apple Music, the 2 most popular streaming services. You can check out each album individually. At the top of the episode before those, you'll also get the full episode playlist. That's all the tunes in one place, and that's on our preferred streaming service, Deezer, where you can also follow us on the podcast, username Adult Music Podcast. You can catch up on all the back playlists as well. And if you can't see that description on the app or whatever service you're listening to us on, just jump over to our host site, Podbean. Look us up, Adult Music, and all the links are easy to follow and see there. Now, if you do enjoy the podcast, please follow or subscribe on whatever app or platform you're listening to us on. And if you'll take a minute to give us a ranking or write a review, we'd appreciate it. That helps us get listed in the browsing category recommendations, which we've been in all week on Podbean. First time in a while.
So we're in some of the jazz lists, but we're not really in the classical lists anymore, are we?
No, we're in the music commentary browsing recommendations on Podbean. And Apple Music Apple Podcast keeps changing up their format. They really shrunk down the browsing categories, and now you have to go to actually the search, and then the number of recommended podcasts is only about a quarter of what it used to be. So I don't know what they're thinking. I guess everybody's making podcasts now, so there's just so many. But actually, our biggest audience number share is on Pandora, which we can't even access from Japan. I got us on there, but I can't see.
Well, if you have a VPN,
I'd have to get a VPN to look at it. Yeah. But that's our biggest percentage, and we just got on there as an extra, I thought. But
they might be commenting all over the place, so we don't even know.
We don't even know. But that'd be good. And So we're doing well in the U.S. there, and we've got number 2 is Japan, number 3 is India, because we're on Ghana and Geo-Savan, which
and people are actually listening.
Yeah,
That's really good.
You know,
I'm surprised we have so many listeners in Japan, though. I'm kind of, even though we live here, I mean, who's listening to us? I don't know. There are more people than we know listening to us. So
we've made it into the top 100 music ones in Japan, looking at the rankings there. So, so someone's listening. That's good to know. And in addition to that, if you have any comments or questions you'd like to send to us directly, please send us an email at adultmusicpodcast. That's all one word, at gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll get back to you.
Yeah.
And so on to these blowing tunes.
Yeah. Well, none of these tunes blow. They more like wail.
They wail. That's right.
I'd like us to know that. All right. Anyway, let's get moving with our first album. Now, the thing is, I chose 3 recordings this week, but I think it might be better to think of this as 2 double albums, because the first album I chose is a double album, right? Remember those? Remember when you used to you get those vinyl with the gatefold sleeves, and it was really exciting. You had all that music, you know? Yeah, they in popular music that just stopped happening now. They don't really do that anymore. It's kind of like single albums now. But in classical music, they never stopped. You still get. In fact, we often have far more listening to do in the classical category than in the jazz, simply because some of these albums are really long. They they put a lot of music on it.
There's a lot of flute on this one, that's for sure.
Yeah, this is a very flutey episode. There's a lot of flute loot, you might want to say, on this program. Yeah. You know, the kind that the Dragon Guards loot.
That's the double O, not the U version.
That's the double O, not the whatever that thing is. Anyway, the other 2 albums I have are both on the same label and were released on the same day. I'll get to that when we get there. They kind of belong together, and I was kind of thinking, yeah, I should have put those together too, but, you know, it's just as well. I mean, we had a lot of listening this week, but it was all, as I said, really enjoyable. The first album is called, rather uncreatively, Mozart and Flute in Paris. Now, basically what this is it's 2 CDs. If you hit the CD, I think on Deezer they listed it all as one. Yeah, long, just one sort of list of albums of tracks, but it's separate. The program is separated into 2 parts on the CD. You know, CD 1 is French works that involve the flute, and the second disc is all Mozart. Okay, so they called it Mozart and Flute in Paris. It really should have been called Flute and Mozart in Paris, because they kind of did it differently. CD 1 was and okay. The theme of the double album is the notion that Paris, France, is the flute capital of the world. Okay, now and it really has taken on its own sort of the flute has taken on its own life in Paris and Parisian and in French music in general. They draw the best colors out of it. If you listen to French works for flute and harp, they're usually magical, and we'll get a little bit of that here. By the way, interestingly enough, Munich, Germany native Theobald Boehm developed the modern flute that French music loves so much, and the Baroque flute was often called I think the French flute. So
I'm getting confused.
No, it was called the German flute. It was called the German flute. Yeah, sorry. Right. The Baroque flute was often referred to as the German flute. So even though it has these German origins, the French really took it in, and it's really associated heavily with French music. Just think of the opening of Debussy's Prélude de l'après-midi d'un faune. Okay, it's got that magical flute line. Flute. Yeah, that it starts with, very atmospheric. Okay, the soloist here, the flute soloist on this record is Emmanuel Pahud, who we heard not last week, 2 weeks ago maybe, on the Nino Rota chamber music album. He played on that one as well. So we're hearing him again, and he's got this beautiful tone, although he really varies it here. This is pretty interesting. Okay, disc 1, let's begin. Disc 1 is called A Tribute to Paris. Okay. And this features the orchestra. By the way, there are a load of other soloists on this album, which I'll mention as we hear them, or as their tracks come up. On the first, really the entire album, the entire 2 discs, the Orchestre de Chambre de Paris, conducted by François Leleux, is the orchestra that's playing in this. Okay, so the first disc, the first part of the program is it's dedicated to French music, and it starts rather boldly with a work by a contemporary composer. Usually you want to save that for a little later. You warm up your audience, and then you hit them with the contemporary work. But no, Pahud is starting with a contemporary work. The composer is Philippe Hersant, and his work is a single movement, 18-minute work called Dreamtime from 2013. It was composed. It's not that old. So people who complain that, classical music is all by music by dead people, no, not here. Not only is this guy living, but this is a fairly recent work. If you're kind of familiar with Dreamtime, if that rings a bell, you might have guessed that the inspiration comes from Australian Aboriginal myths, according to which the world was created in the Dreamtime by ancestors, in quotation marks, ancestors, they're referred to as ancestors of humanity, I guess, or at least of the Aborigine people in Australia, who sang the world into existence as they walked across the land. If anyone's ever read Bruce Chatwin's book, The Songlines, he describes this pretty well. It's a really great book. I want to recommend it. Read it way back in college. Very inspirational for me.
Well, that's interesting because in the Christian tradition, God spoke the world into existence. Yeah. So the power of sound to create the world is a kind of universal theme.
Right. I think even Indian music kind of goes into that a little bit too, like vibrations sort of cause everything to come into being.
Good vibrations.
So there seems to be sort of an agreement about that vibration had a lot to do with the origins of the world. I'm kind of happy to know that.
Yeah.
Okay. There's even in Handel's Ode for Saint Cecilia's Day coming up, by the way, November 22nd. She's the patron saint of music in the Catholic Church, or one of them. Some people say it's Gregory the Great too, but I think of it as Saint Cecilia still. In the poem that Handel sets, the earth is ended by sound as well at the end. John Dryden's poem kind of talks about that.
Big boom.
The big music shall untune the sky, he says at the end. The dead shall live, the living die, and music shall untune the sky. It's kind of nice, and especially the way Handel sets it. It's really, really memorable. Okay, so the work begins on the flute. Now, we think of, if you're familiar with Pahud's playing, you generally think of him as having this exceptionally beautiful tone and this amazing rapport with whoever he's, whoever's accompanying him. They're very together. He's really almost like magnetic the way he plays. This particular work, though, he's got a harsher tone. He really, it's really interesting, the approach that he takes here. The work begins with a small pentatonic melody, and it repeats throughout. You hear it very often. It keeps coming back. And I think it kind of acts as sort of like a guidepost to where you are in the work. Like there's a new section starting, and you hear that theme again. So that'll help you get through the 18 minutes of this, which is no great hardship, by the way. It's a very listenable work. It's not like relaxing or beautiful, but it's not hard to listen to. It's kind of exciting, really. I liked it a lot. I was rather surprised by this. The pentatonic melody is supposed to mimic the ancestors' song. It's got this really pretty fluttering opening. The work has a pretty fluttering opening by the orchestra, and then the flute comes in with this harsh edge to the tone, and it's very far forward in the orchestra as well. There's no danger of the orchestra swamping this instrument. They really recorded him up front, and he's playing loud and harshly as well, but not an ugly sound. I don't want to make it sound that way, but he's just kind of there's power to the sound. It's not like a a beautiful sound. It's a powerful sound that he's going for. Okay, the flute plays the connecting pentatonic melody first, and this work is episodic. So you hear that theme, and then something like a new sort of landscape will come into being, and the orchestra and the flute will sort of are sort of singing that into existence, and then you'll hear the theme again, and then the music will change, and there'll be another episode, and it goes on like this for the 18 minutes, and it's all really interesting. I have to say, I like the orchestration. Now you're gonna hear the flute a lot. Of course, it's really a work for a solo flute, but the orchestration is well worth listening to here. It carries a lot of I think the various instruments, the tones that you hear, are supposed to give you the features of the landscape. So it's very much a kind of almost pictorial work, almost like a painting.
I like this one a lot.
Sound.
Of course, it's my first time to hear it, but I thought, just a general impression, it's very atmospheric. In the orchestration, there's a lot of nice brass arrangement, and in the middle section of the movement, it's a nice arrangement of low strings and brass, and then the flute is sort of floating above that. So it's sort of, almost this levitating sound. And as we always hear in French music, the timbres are paid careful attention to. Even though it's a very modern piece, the tones are matched, and so the composer has picked out things so you don't confuse tones, or things don't get blurred there. And then, as you mentioned, the flute technique, he gets a lot of trilling and then some kind of breathy growling, almost like Jethro Tull kind of flute thing in here. And then at the end, there's some really great thundering timpani in the percussion.
There's a multiphonic effect that he gets in the solo flute as well. I have no idea how he does it. But it's a pretty amazing sound. You think, that's a flute? I really would have liked to have seen him do that rather than just hear it. He gets some pretty interesting effects here. It's mostly a piercing sound. It has an edge to it, and he also plays very acrobatic sort of passages as well. So I guess some of this was difficult to create. He's trying to communicate, of course, creative power, a piercing of the fabric of the earth in order to create. Okay, so fascinating. I like this all the way through. It really caught me right from the beginning. It's an easy listening, but it's not a relaxing listen.
No, but
let me put
this
it
is
that
a
way.
good contemporary piece, I think, that would have appeal to a lot of people. Put it on a concert program, people will like it, I think. It keeps your attention, and it's accessible. So, thumbs up for this one. Yeah,
something I'm going to want to hear again and again. I want to get into this work, and it also kind of puts you into that whole myth too. Because when you have the picture of like the song lines and what we know about the Aboriginal myths and stuff, it's something more to engage with as you listen. It kind of gives you some interesting images to conjure with as you listen. Do give this a listen. I really liked it a lot. Okay, so we get the dramatic contemporary opener, and the rest of the CD is very tame and romantic after that, which is kind of strange. Because after this, we come up with a late 19th century piece, and they're all associated. The opening ones are associated with Paul Taffanel, who gave the flute new prestige in France in the late 19th century. So he played a lot of these works, and that's what Pahud is thinking about here. Two works by Camille Saint-Saëns. Remember, it's the 100th anniversary of his death this year. I'm glad we're getting a lot of Saint-Saëns into the program this year. The first work is a romance, Opus 37, from 1871. And then we also get his Olech, Opus 162 from 1920, so really from two ends of his career. Now, Olech, by the way, is a small ode. Is what he gets that word from. So we know what an ode is. You can figure out what Olech is. It's rather kind of a small ode,
a tiny one.
Yeah, tiny one. A modest one, let's say. Okay. That's the word I was looking for. Okay, Romance. The Romance became one of Taffanel's pieces of choice. He played this a lot. And this is quite a change in tone from the previous piece. It's really Pahud is playing with his customary gorgeous tone here, as he would in a gorgeous romantic piece like this. And he gets a little rhetorical in this too, about the figuration in the 2-minute mark about. Usually figuration is often just played, but he actually kind of makes it sound like a statement. He makes kind of a statement with this kind of like sound. It's a beautiful work, very serene by the end. You may have heard it before. It's really good. Odelette is a diminutive of an ode. The flute begins in its lower register here. I always love lower flute or wind registers. Pahud draws a rich, deeply emotional sound out of the lower tones. He's really moving here. And this is another work that's resigned and serene. Very nice.
Yeah, I like this one. There's sort of a counterpoint with strings and oboe in about 2 minutes or so. It's just really nice timbre matching, and the parts just. Well, I find when French composers get instruments in the same register, they're always with sort of very different timbres, so they stand out, and you can sort of see those colors, in your mind as you listen to it, and so just those little kind of matchings always make an impression on me. And then, like you said, in these two pieces, he's showing off that really rich low tone that he has, and the phrasing is really nice too. So,
right, very different than nice the opening work. He's got a lot of versatility. All right, next we have for those of you who like women composers. See, I hate to kind of like point out, oh, this is a woman composer, but I know that we have, as I've said before, at least one listener who wants to know about women composers. So I just want to point it out for those interested in that, because I think their music fits in with everybody else's. So I don't feel like we should kind of hold that up. But some people want us to do that. Okay, Cecil Chaminade, a composer who I recommend you hear more of, and this is a good introduction to her work. It's a brief concertino, Opus 107 from 1902. Okay. Now, I got to give you a little history here. This was written for the Concours de Prix, which is a competition that Paul Taffanel, the French popularizer of the flute in France, he insisted that the Conservatoire in Paris, he said that instead of having like a competition where everybody's playing this work and seeing who plays it better, it should require a new work to be written every year that the students then have to play, and then that's the competition. This was written for one of those in 1902. It starts now, usually these pieces start lyrically. The first half is showing off the tone of the soloist, and then by the midway mark, they're usually around 8 or 10 minutes long. The midway mark, there's a new section, and it's really very virtuosic, and you got to show your technique there. So they want to hear tone and technique in these, and that became the form that most of these works took. So this piece starts lyrically, concertino, with a downward marching figure from the orchestra, and a pastoral melody in the flute. We do kind of associate the flute with Pan, with the countryside, things like that. So she's kind of evoking that here in the opening. It's very touching, and then the virtuosic second half maintains its pastoral feeling with an occasional musette bass in the low strings. Now, the musette is like a gentle bagpipe. So if you think of Scottish bagpipes, they're really powerful and loud. The musette is kind of a little quieter than that. It's a little more modest, and you hear it a lot in whenever you hear like a pedal point bass, like a bass that kind of continues through like different chord changes. That's usually a musette in classical music. It's got a big grand finish. It's a gorgeous work, really pretty, really rather lush at the end. Very enjoyable. Cecil Chaminade, Concertino. Make sure you hear that. All right, now the other big piece, I think the big piece was the opener, but the middle of this section is Francis Poulenc. How did he wind up with the name Francis? If he's French, he should be Francois. I always wondered about that. I don't know. Anyway, his flute sonata written for violin and piano, but here we have an orchestration of it by Lennox Berkeley, British conductor. British composer, sorry. Okay, the sonata was written in 1957, and I know this piece well. I've heard it many times. But the orchestration by Lennox Berkeley, which was done in 1976, is completely new to me. So I recognize the melody of the piece, and the orchestration kind of smooths out a lot of the piano's, what we hear as the piano's attack, because he kind of smooths a lot of it out. It's kind of it's a very different feeling work than the one I'm used to. He kind of darkens the texture of the flute and piano version with his orchestration. This orchestration pushes the flute further into the spotlight. It's accompanying the flute, whereas in the flute and piano version, they're sort of partners. The flute and piano both have solo parts, whereas it kind of sounds like the orchestra when it plays like its kind of solo parts. It just kind of gets subsumed into just feels like an accompaniment sort of. In the first movement, it's a 3-movement work, I should mention. The first movement is called Alegreto Malinconico. It sounds more pastoral in the orchestral context than it does in its original version. The orchestration brings out the pastoral elements, and this is Berkeley's doing. He's really changed, I think, Poulenc's intent a little bit here. I'm not saying this is bad. It's just different. It's his interpretation of the work. There's a cantilena that comes in the second movement. It's marked assez lent, which means rather slow. This is the more melancholy movement than the first one's called Allegro Malinconico, but this one actually sounds more melancholy. The orchestration is atmospheric here, and it kind of acts as a bed for the flute melody, which does not really happen in the flute and piano version. And the third movement, presto giocoso. Gioco is a game, so fast and playfully, I guess. Pahud really shines here in this movement in his virtuosity, and he maintains a beautiful tone through very fast passages. Actually, I think Pahud actually recorded the flute and piano version on an album from around the year 2000 called Paris. And I forget who his pianist was on that. So he's recorded this before. Anyway, it's pretty interesting to hear. It's a little different than what we're used to. So you can rediscover this work or hear another man's interpretation of it.
Yeah, I like this one a lot. I liked how he varies his tone in here according to the phrases. The flute sounds almost like different instruments depending on what he's expressing at the moment, and the tones match pretty well. And as you mentioned,
he's more in the spotlight here as well.
Yeah, the second movement is melancholy and quite pretty, and the third movement is it's spirited and rhythmic, but it also has contrasting slower passages, so it sort of takes you on a little journey. But nice arc over the 3 movements. I enjoyed it.
Okay, next we have 2 more works. We have Gabrielle Forrest, who I love. He's one of my favorite composers. Fantasie, Opus 79. This is orchestrated by Louis Aubert in 1957, so long after this piece was written. It was written in 1898. Okay, so kind of towards the end of Forrest's career, but sort of in the middle, I guess, more towards the late middle part. Okay, now this piece was also, like the Chaminade above, written for the competition, the Concours de Prix for the Conservatoire. This was the first work written for that, I think. This is just right after Taffanel decided he wanted to do this. And Forrest, by setting the work into 2 parts, like slow, showing off the tone, and then fast virtuosic, he really set the mold for what these kind of pieces would be like. So he's really responsible for a lot of pieces that are like this. I think of Debussy's Danse Sacrée, Danse Profane for a harp and orchestra, which was also a competition piece. It follows that same pattern. Let's see. What do I want to say about this? He gives ample opportunity for the judges to hear the flautist tone in the beginning. There are long phrases over this slow waltzing or 3/4 melody rhythm at the beginning. And the second virtuosic half is vibrant and celebratory and requires expression of joy from the flute as the player is put through his paces. So you got to be playing this really difficult stuff and sound joyful not an easy task. A lot of people are just kind of playing through the notes. One wonders how students fare in this, but of course, Pahud is fantastic here. This is an uplifting piece, actually. I liked it a lot. The last piece is by Saint-Saëns again. His Tarantelle. Tarantella is an Italian dance from Naples. And in this one, it features Paul Meyer on the clarinet. And he's going to figure on the next disc a lot. And this one starts with this rolling upward motion in the low strings and drum roll figures in the winds. The flute and clarinet soloists emerge out of the quick marching rhythms with figuration, and then the 6/8 rhythm of the tarantella, it's a compound meter, takes over for a while. And then it changes to a 4/4, which is kind of interesting. The rhythm changes. So I think of a tarantella, you're just going to hear 6/8 all the way through, but that's not what happens here. He gets this flowing 4/4 rhythm taking over, and the flute gets a long solo. The tarantella rhythm returns, and the flute gets the quick figuration in this. The clarinet is kind of accompanying, really. And then it plays together in harmony with the clarinet. And the clarinet then gets to play some quick flowing figures, and then a ferocious whirling ending occurs, an exciting ending to the first disc of this program.
It's a nice blend with the clarinet as an ending in that. So, the way the ending is very climactic, and so how the duo phrases build up and then boom, and then you're out on the first disc. So, yeah, nice ending.
Right. Disc 2 is subtitled Concert Spirituel. Now, what a concert spirituel was, this was in a concert series. It was one of the first concert series like ever in the world, and it was created in Paris. And works were written for soloists to play with an orchestra, or in chamber works as well, in that series of programs. This lasted from around 1728. Let me see. I think I have the dates here somewhere. Until like I think after Mozart died, but shortly after. The first work, both of these works on this disc, they're 2 3-movement works, and they were both written for the Concert Spirituel in Paris, one of the first public concert series ever. All right, the first work is called, this has got a pretty interesting history too, I'll get into that in a moment, the Sinfonia Concertante. Sinfonia Concertante for flute, oboe, horn, and bassoon in E flat, Kürschel Anhang, number 9. So this was not really a part of Mozart's catalog, and I'll explain why in a moment. This was reconstructed, and the cadenzas were written by the American musicologist Robert D. Levin. And the soloists were Emmanuel Pahud, of course, on the flute. It's really his album. The conductor, François Leleux, is on the oboe. But he's not conducting here. He's playing the oboe. Radovan Vlatkovich on the horn. And that's the French horn. And Gilbert Audin on the bassoon, or the 4 soloists. There's also an orchestra, too. Oh, no, just the 4 instruments, sorry. Okay, this was composed for the Concert Spirituels in Paris 2 weeks after Mozart arrived there in 1778. He was 22 years old. A young man, but a really brilliant one. Now, he was already known in Europe because he was a child prodigy, and his dad kind of brought him around Europe, and, when he was like a baby, like this 5-year-old child who was doing amazing things on the keyboard and wowing the crowned heads of Europe, much to his dad's enrichment. Anyway, he came back when he was 22 and wrote this piece. This particular piece with 4 soloists is rather unusual because it enlarged the size of Parisian concertants, which usually had 2 soloists. And it may have been the first work to feature such instrumentation. It was never performed, though, because there was an Italian composer named Cambini who was outraged when Mozart performed a work of his, Cambini's, at the piano from memory and improvised a new ending. Not because he was showing off, because he didn't like Cambini's work, but because he had forgotten how Cambini's work ended. He didn't remember it all. Now, if anyone has seen the movie Amadeus, you see Mozart do this to one of Salieri's works, and Salieri is kind of upset about that. Well, it wasn't Salieri that it really happened to. In fact, we're not even sure that Mozart and Salieri ever met. That's just a movie. But a lot of stories about Mozart wind up happening to the humiliation of Salieri in the movie. But really, they happened to different people. But in this case, it was this guy Cambini. Cambini was pretty outraged by that, as Italians can be. And he hid the work so that it wouldn't be performed, and substituted one of his own instead to be performed at that particular concert. The problem is that the work itself was never found, and Cambini's work disappeared as well. So I guess we'll never get to hear that. Now, there was a copy for different soloists, including the clarinet, found among a musicologist's papers in 1870. But, music scholarship is really complicated. And Mozart was the primary author of this. Robert D. Levin reconstructed the work in its original form from that. He didn't think the work was in its original form, and he just sort of, I don't know how he did it, but this is a reconstruction. We're not really sure that this is the way Mozart would have wanted it, but it is very Mozartian, so I think he did a pretty good job. Anyway, he reconstructed for these 4 instruments. There's no clarinet in this particular version. All right, the first movement is an Allegro, and I have to say, right from the beginning, it's too bad this audience didn't get to hear this work. They really would have loved it. It's got this graceful gliding quality to it. It's typical Mozart, really. The orchestra sounds good. The soloists, again, any kind of a Pahud performance, the soloists, they're all like one unit. It's really amazing how he and his soloist partners all get this amazing blend of sound. It's hard to distinguish the timbres of the 4 instruments. They're all in perfect synchrony. And this is a really beautiful performance. You should listen between the 8 and 10 minute marks. You can really hear it there. It's really beautiful playing. The first movement is almost 10 minutes long, which is pretty long for a work like this, I think. The second movement is an adagio, and it starts with this watery rippling effect as the soloist lines overlap. Very enchanting. And the gorgeous ideas keep coming. The players make the most of them. This is probably the best performed account of this you'll ever hear. I can't imagine anything better. And the last movement, very long, because it's an andantino con variazioni. It's got a lot of variations on the main theme in it. Again, Mozart starts with this square-sounding rhythm that isn't quite square. He always kind of adds this sort of extra beat so that there's something off about the melody, and then he sort of does his variations on that. He's got sort of an added tail. There's a chromatic descent at the end of the main melody, and we expect this of Mozart. He does this all the time. Always listen for that little quirk in everything he does. This is subjected to variations, and the players catch the playful mood splendidly. They sound like they're really enjoying themselves playing this. It's really beautiful. Interesting work. Next is another work written for the Concert Spirituel, the Concerto for Flute and Harp from 1778, same year. This is a pretty famous work. A lot of you have probably heard this. Now, the interesting thing about this, the cadenzas in this particular performance were written by Nino Rota, the Italian composer from the 20th century, whose music we heard.
Hey, Nino Rota again.
Yeah, well, I think Mozart actually wrote cadenzas for this, but they used the Nino Rota ones, which is kind of interesting. I'll talk about them when we get to them. Okay, now this one is a little more traditional because it has a flute and harp, so 2 soloists, which is kind of what these concerts usually was expected at these concerts. All right, the first movement, Allegro. Just hearing the harp timbre after all of this, like these winds, is really welcome. It's a really beautiful sound. Both soloists have fantastic tones and a smooth rapport. This is a really great performance. Rota's his cadenza here is a little understated. It's very short, and it kind of goes a little bit. See, Rota, like I said when we did his chamber music, he's got a foot in the Romantic era, and then one in the kind of more tawdry areas of the 20th century. But he's really full Romantic here. There's a little. The whole kind of pace sort of slows down a bit when it comes on, but it's good. It's almost unnoticeable, really. It's very understated in this movement. The second movement, Andantino, is one of the most accomplished feats of gentleness in music. It's very special. If you're not familiar with this work, make sure you hear this. It's more reined in than other performances I've heard. Like, it's shy. It's not really kind of playing out as much. It seems a little bit like kind of retreating. Still, very beautiful, lovely rapport between the soloists. And the third movement, rondo. A rondo is a theme that comes back. We keep coming back around to the theme as we depart from it for various other sections. This is a pretty high-speed tempo here, faster than usual. It feels comfortable, though, with these soloists. And the rota cadenza here is pretty florid, I thought. Really more than I would expect than I've heard from the other cadenzas I've heard in this work. It includes dramatic pauses and harp flourishes as well. Like when you hear the harp going, those kind of glissandi and things like that. Yeah, kind of a cliche. But it's beautiful, though. I liked it. It does have a foot in the romantic tradition, though. It's a little more kind of, I guess, more romantic sounding.
I was thinking, these two instruments, they're kind of an angelic combination. Yeah. I was seeing little cupids floating around while I was listening to it. Must be that romantic tinge that Rota added to it, but it's quite,
right.
Other plain sort of lifting tones that you hear from those instruments. And
Rota sort of highlights the harp in that cadenza too. He which is kind of interesting given that it's Pahud's disc. But anyway, he didn't write it for Pahud, obviously. It's been sitting around and they just decided to do it. This is probably among my top recordings of this particular work. So anyway, I really loved this album. I'd like to hear it again. I probably will hear it many more times, and I highly, highly recommend it.
Yep, a good one to start out. The Wind Extravaganza on flute.
Yeah, and if you're afraid of contemporary music, give that first work a listen. I think you'll really enjoy it, and you'll be back in the fold as far as contemporary classical music goes. It's really an enjoyable work, and does sound sort of contemporary as well. Mm. Okay, next. Now, I had mentioned that the next two albums kind of could count as sort of a double album. They're both released on the Orchid Classics label, which is a British label, and they both feature winners of the 2019 Carl Nielsen competition. And they're both released on the same day as well. Go figure. So, and the covers of the albums aren't really terribly different either, because I think it's sort of, one's black and white, one's color, but nevertheless, the first one we're going to talk about, well, I'll separate these, and they both feature works by Carl Nielsen as well, interestingly enough. The first one is by Joséphine Olech on the flute, and we hear the Odense Symphony Orchestra conducted by Anna Skryleva. She also conducts the next one as well. And the album doesn't have a name. It's just Concerto for Flute by Nielsen. Who's the other guy here? Verhey. Yeah, new name for me. And Françaix, a composer I really love, by the way. Anyway, so Olech, like the clarinetist Blas Baravec, who we're going to hear next, won the 2019 Carl Nielsen competition for their instruments, and they've both put these records out. All right, so this program by Olech on the flute, Joséphine Olech, starts with Nielsen's Concerto for Flute and Orchestra, written in 1926. All right, a little background. Nielsen was interested in the what was the name of the group? There was the Copenhagen Wind Quintet, which was pretty famous at the time, and he had decided that he wanted to write a concerto for each member. He wrote a wind quintet for them, which is pretty well known, and he wanted to write a concerto for all 5 members. And he only got around to writing 2 of them before he finally died, and we're going to hear both of them today. Nielsen wrote 3 concerti in his entire life. One of them was an early romantic work for violin, and then these 2 came at the end of his life. They're both pretty quirky. The Concerto for Flute and Orchestra was written for the Copenhagen Wind Quintet's particular is the word they use in the booklet, and even you can call him pedantic flautist Holger Gilbert Jespersen. He's particular. Fastidious. Today we'd say anal. That's what they're trying to say here. Okay, so you can kind of imagine this fussy kind of character, and the concerto includes his character in the playing, and it pokes gentle fun at him, at his fastidiousness, by pitting him against a rather intrusive bass trombone. And which kind of leaves, every time you hear the bass trombone, the flute kind of sounds like this angry bird. It's kind of affronted and starts chirping away in these highly virtuosic passages, which nevertheless show the flutist off to his to show his virtuosity off. So it's kind of a fun work. It's a little unusual too. Now, Nielsen said that the flute cannot deny its own nature. Its home is in Arcadia, and it prefers pastoral moods. Now, you might want to think of Paderus Vask's work from last week, the Oboe Concerto, so we're kind of in the same sort of territory here. This doesn't quite sound quite as pastoral as that work, but there are moments. It's in 2 movements, this work, and the first movement, Allegro Moderato, I should describe this a little bit. It starts dramatically with this kind of explosive opening. If we remember, our favorite Nielsen Fourth Symphony starts similarly. And then as Nielsen says, these are his words translated to English, and I'm reading from the booklet, the solo instrument moves about as if seeking something until it takes hold of a more decisive motive. And the motive sounds chirpy. The soloist puts it across with full cheer. And one of the things I notice about this soloist is she's exceptionally good at altering the mood, like immediately on a dime. She just suddenly change the mood that she's playing in. So it's pretty extraordinary. So if you're listening carefully, she'll often catch you off guard with that ability. It's pretty interesting. It's a good quality to have for this particular work. Okay, now in this work, as in with a lot of Nielsen's music, there's a conflict between key areas. So 2 key areas will compete, and then one will wind up winning in the end. In this case, it's D minor and E flat. And the E flat theme is the more expansive, romantic one, and that makes us want to hear it, and that's the one we're going to want to hear it end in, which is what happens. The D minor is more uptight and sinister. So this is sort of this flautist in both of his moods, okay, I suppose. And we hear a secondary theme. Then we hear timpani. Timpani are always ominous in Nielsen's music. Just listen to the Fourth Symphony. And then we hear the bass trombone, the villain. Well, not really villain, but it's sort of the gadfly of the piece, shall we say. It's always kind of poking at the flautist. He mocks the elegant flute with his vulgar sounds. It's pretty noticeable. He does a lot of glissandos. It's really kind of cute. The flute is affronted, and it asserts its dominance with an expansive melody, and then 3 brief cadenzas. And they're all beautiful, so the flautist really gets to play out here. This is really his moment. He's not really going to get it in the second movement as much. And Olech really shines in this section. She catches all the moods, and she gets a sense of rhetoric in her thoughtful cadenza at about the 9-minute mark. You get the impression of something thoughtful coming out as opposed to just, show. I'm really won over by her playing at this point and can't really wait to hear the rest of the album, so I was kind of happy about that. Okay, the movement ends quietly and romantically, but the problems aren't over yet. The second movement, and this is the final movement, Allegreto un poco, Adagio ma non troppo, and then Tempo di marcia. This starts with a martial-sounding rhythm from the orchestra. It's harsh, like in the first movement. Both of these movements start out rather harshly, surprising for an instrument written for the flute. But the flute's job seems to be to calm it all down and to just kind of assert its sort of its mood, and which is apparently what this particular flute soloist it was written for did. It was in his character. He wanted everything to be just so. And I'm getting that picture of him from this work. Anyway, the movement softens in the Adagio section. It's really lovely. Olech gives a full sense of wistfulness and then happiness in the more staccato section. And then the material is transformed into an agitated march, and then the bass trombone returns, mocking the march rhythm, providing vulgar downward glissandos which set the flute off like a disturbed bird. And then at the end, it resolves the music into E flat, which is really the flute's job. So it kind of like beat the flute to the conclusion, and it's rather pats itself on the back by making all sorts of anticlimactic sort of glissandi while the flute just kind of triumphantly plays its ending. It's a cute piece. Listen for that conflict between the flute and the bassoon. It's not a bassoon. What did I say? This was a trombone, bass trombone. It's a very different sounding instrument than the flute. The contrast is great. I really enjoyed this a lot.
Yeah, I like this. Actually, I guess maybe you had shared Nielsen Symphonies with me
long ago,
a long time ago, maybe 15 years or so or more. Anyway, around that time, I wanted to hear more Nielsen, but his symphonies got recorded. Well, they didn't get recorded enough, but you could find them. But at one time, I was just in one of the music stores here, and I ran across a 10 CD set of Nielsen music, and I thought, well, I may never find all of Nielsen's music together in one place. And this was by
and you wouldn't have found them that day if I had gotten there first.
And that was by the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra, right. Douglas Bostock conducting. And basically had almost all of the orchestral and concertos that Nielsen had composed, and it actually has both the flute and then the clarinet concerto that we'll hear later. So I had heard these before. I have to say, of the two, I really prefer this flute concerto more because the orchestral parts are more sort of reminiscent of his symphonies. If you hear it and you're familiar with his symphonies, you'll recognize those sort of dual keys, centers, and
that happens in the clarinet concerto too, but it's a darker work. Yeah, we'll get to that.
And then where else are you going to get really cool low brass parts in a flute concerto too? So I really like this one.
But cool, but I like it's kind of cartoonish what he does to the but it's cute. I really enjoyed the whole
also
narrative.
Like in the second movement, the bassoon part, how it sort of dances playfully with the flute in this work too. So there's a lot of things to like in this flute concerto, and I think it's a great showcase for the flute, but it also captures kind of the spirit of Nielsen's orchestral works a lot. And so
I often wonder if the original flautist, I should say, really, it was chastened by the the fun that was kind of made of him in this concerto. I mean, he got his virtuosic parts, but it's kind of aimed at kind of like portraying him in a way, So anyway, we never met him, but we remember him the way this concerto presents him. All right, the next work. 3-movement concerto for flute and orchestra by Theodor Verhey, who is a Dutch composer, and one that's a new name for me. I have never heard his music. He's written 2 flute concerti, apparently. This is the first of them, written in 1902. Now, he was friendly with Robert and Clara Schumann and with Johannes Brahms, so he's really inspired by them. And they supported his music, too. The first movement, Allegro Nontropo, it really sounds like, to me, something Schumann would write. But it's unique, though. It doesn't sound like Schumann, but it kind of sounds like something out of his... you would think of him as coming up with it just because of the sound world it uses. The first movement has a kind of darting accompaniment over which the flute plays its melody. It's very enjoyable. The second movement, Andantino, connects to the first movement. Actually, this whole thing continues like a 1-movement piece, actually. It's a lyrical melody, and it's memorable. Very nice. The third movement, Allegro alla Zingarese, and there's your Brahms influence there. Zingarese means like, I guess, you don't want to say gypsy music anymore, but the music of the Hungarian, refugees in Germany that Brahms heard, okay, and that Dvorak also heard. I guess Verhey heard them too. So it has all these sort of Hungarian sort of folk themes in it. Also, although they're not as strong as in Brahms's work, it's catchy with the flute's downward figures in the opening. The finale is really demanding. It seems to be in sonata form too, because the opening repeats. And I thought this was a really enjoyable work. I got to hear it a few more times, to be honest. After the Nielsen, it doesn't sound so remarkable, but I think it is really good. So it just kind of is in the shadow of the, programming wise of the Flute Concerto. But I thought it was really good. I liked it a lot.
I like this one. It's an easy listen. The melodies really stand out. And
there's not much to say about it, really. I mean, it's kind of, it won't really surprise you, but it's really good. It's really enjoyable.
And particularly the third movement, the flute is very playful as it goes over this kind of very alternating sections of bowed and plucked strings. And then you get this nice floating flute kind of dancing playfully over that. So, enjoyable and easy to listen to.
And speaking of easy to listen to, the last work by Jean-Francaise. Now, he's a 20th century French composer, and this is a composer not to be afraid of. He wrote very light, pleasurable music. He represents the French school of playing very well. This work, Concerto for Flute and Orchestra, focuses on virtuosity, flexibility of sound, and articulation. So the three things you'd expect in a concerto. He said he wrote his music to give pleasure. Now you got to remember, these are in the days of Pierre Boulez and the serial music. The big bad kind of like mid 20th century intellectual.
The painful music.
Not very painful music. Yeah, the House of Pain music from the island of Dr. Moreau, I guess. I don't know, but he wasn't political at all. He just wanted his music to give pleasure. Those are his own words. And Poulenc said that his music was full of lightness and poetical insight. That really is an excellent description of his music in general and what we hear here. It's light. It's very French sounding. It'll just make your day. This is a work that you should probably listen to when you get out of bed in the morning. It'll just kind of make the rest of the day go well.
It's got really pretty harmonies. And what I noticed about this in comparison with other works is the way, rather than the flute floating above things, he interweaves the flute with other instrumental lines in a kind of really interesting way. So this sort of, in tandem navigating through the rest of the orchestra. And the second movement is really quite lovely.
Yeah. By the way, I should mention the whole work uses connecting cyclical forms. Those of you who like that, César Franck used to like them, so the same themes sort of repeat throughout the work, and they connect everything. Debussy and Ravel did this as well. The first movement, Presto, has a wild, chaotic opening. The flute gets this cadenza-like intro before the orchestra playing starts to accompany, which is kind of nice. And there's something really circusy about this theme. Another thing, the flute never stops playing. Despite the virtuosity, Olech's tone remains attractive throughout. Okay, she managed to keep this beautiful tone when she's being put through her paces. There are a lot of isolated orchestra moments to enjoy in the movement, not least the violin's passage after the 3-minute mark and the burbling woodwinds after 4 minutes. Really lovely. God, there's some great ideas in this movement and in this whole work in general. There's a flute cadenza after 6 minutes and another one. And again, attractive tone, virtuosity. And there's an exhausted end-of-day feeling at the end of this movement, and there's no pause. This whole work goes through like it's one long piece. It goes into the andantino, which Russ mentioned. The flute has a song-like melody, beautifully shaped by the soloist, Joséphine Olech. The middle section picks up energy, and a brief cadenza ends the movement. The third movement, scherzo, or a joke, or something playful, starts with downward figures. The flute joins in at a quick pace, and there's some really impressive virtuosity in this movement as well, interspersed with the lyricism. The fourth movement, Allegro / Allegretto con spirito molto, the flute opens with a very quick figure. There's a downward moving theme to this work. This is what I talked about, the cyclical sort of material. It's all downward moving. You kind of hear these downward moving chords throughout and in the melody as well. So we hear that again, and we get to hear various orchestral groups commenting as the flute plays. Nice effect. And Russ had mentioned this a little earlier. After 2 minutes, we get into a teasing cabaret-style theme. The tempo picks up at a hectic pace at around the 3-minute, 30-second mark. And the quickness of the orchestra in response to the flute, not to mention the flute's virtuosity, are all impressive. The flute takes a teasing cadenza after 4 minutes, which lasts a pretty long time, 2 minutes. And then there's a spirited move to the final cadence to end the movement. This whole album is fantastic. I want to hear it again. Maybe I'll hear it tomorrow, but we gotta get on to new stuff. So I don't know when I'm gonna get to hear it again. This is really great. I liked it a lot.
Yeah, nice album.
Yeah. Moving on. This is the other winner of the Carl Nielsen competition, this time for clarinet. This is Blaž Sparovek, also accompanied by the Odense Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Anna Skryleva. Orchid classics again. Both of these albums were released on the same day, which is kind of why I wanted to pair them. All right, this one starts with Debussy's Première Rhapsodie for clarinet and orchestra. It was originally for clarinet and piano, I believe. Written in 1909 for the Paris Conservatoire clarinet competition. This one really, it doesn't sound hard. It's kind of a mean piece in a way because it doesn't sound hard, but Debussy makes sure that the key and all of these things have awkward fingerings for the clarinetist. I mean, you wouldn't know this as a listener because it just sounds all smooth and beautiful. But he's got a lot of awkward fingerings and long, drawn-out tones, which require excellent breath control. You'll notice that part, perhaps, especially if you've ever played a wind instrument. It's a really beautiful, melting piece. It's we've heard it before, actually, on this program. I don't remember when, just recently, though. Sparovek, of course, is able to put this across without a problem. The tone just sounds beautiful throughout. He has a kind of drowsiness to his interpretation, which I rather enjoyed. It's got a lulling feeling to it. Yeah, he's got a nice tone. It's not especially rich. I mean, I've heard fuller tones from other players, but it's still very listenable. I enjoyed it a lot. That could also be the recording. I mean, I don't know how he's recorded, but it sounded great. All right, next, Carl Nielsen. This is Carl Nielsen's other concerto for the Copenhagen Wind Quintet. This one's for clarinet and orchestra. This is the last one he completed.
This one was interesting to me
yeah.
because in the notes it said for piano or orchestra. And so I was wondering because this one has a lot of snare in it. So I was wondering what they do on the piano for the snare parts.
Drum. Yeah. Now, the snare drum, when I heard that, I thought right away, the Fifth Symphony, which has an intrusive snare drum in the first movement, it kind of tries to sort of destabilize the key or throw the whole orchestra off, and in the end, the orchestra winds up chasing it away. So for Nielsen, the snare drum has a disruptive quality to it, and that will be the case in this concerto as well. This was written for the Copenhagen Wind Quintet's clarinetist Age Oxenvad. I have no idea if I'm saying that correctly, so forgive me, Danish listeners. Now, Oxenvad, rather a little more seriously than the flute player, who is pedantic, Oxenvad was bipolar. This must have been some ensemble. So he was kind of subject to sudden changes of mood as a result. And Nielsen puts that quality into this piece, and the snare drum tends to trigger it. All right, so that'll help you a little. That's a part of the reason why this piece might sound a little weird. It's not quite, it's not as straightforward as you would think. So you could think of it as like a modern sort of take on like a person's personality, or an early 20th century one anyway. So Nielsen used the snare drum in his Fifth Symphony, and he described the clarinet as at once warm-hearted and completely hysterical, gentle as balm, and screaming as a streetcar on poorly lubricated rails. Now, incidentally, in the Fifth Symphony, it is the clarinet that goes berserk when the snare drum starts playing. It really threatens to go off the rails, and it's kind of sort of brought back into the fold in the first movement of that work. There's a struggle between two keys, this time between F and E, typical of Nielsen's work. I'm not sure what key it ends in, though. This is cast as a single movement, but it's divided into 3 sections despite the 4 tracks that are on the album. It's actually a 3-section work. the second and third tracks are the second middle section. So the second section begins with a horn solo, which we'll hear at the beginning of the second movement, the second track on this in this concerto, and then the third movement starts after cadenza. That would be the fourth track of the concerto. This work starts with some pretty adventurous, reedy, low-end figuration. So, of course, I love that, okay? From the violin. Oh, no, sorry, from the violin. From the clarinet. Right at the beginning of this work. A sound I love. Some wild playing in the high end follows. So he's really kind of going to both ends of the clarinet. And there's kind of a folky accompaniment that we hear in the orchestra. It's kind of folksy. A more lyrical passage occurs. Then there's a cadenza. Cadenza is the solo for the soloist without the orchestra playing. A new rhythmic figure starts at around 6 minutes and 30 seconds. And great virtuosity at the 8-minute mark. The clarinet is an instrument that really can show off a lot of virtuosity. You know, it's really cool. Okay, the second section begins poco adagio. It starts with a horn solo. The clarinet's melody here is heartfelt, gorgeous phrasing from Skryleva here. And the snare drum, after 3 minutes, sends the clarinet into a tizzy. Okay, the music suddenly gets quiet. The clarinet plays melodic coming to terms. It kind of comes back to earth. We continue on the third track with a marking Allegro Nontropo. This continues the second section. There's a lot of snare drum. It seems to agitate the clarinet into a state that's more on edge. Cadenza 2 starts at the 5-minute mark, and there's some excellent quick repeated note virtuosity here from Skryleva. And then the third section, the fourth track of this concerto, is Allegro Vivace. It's aggressive from the orchestra and snare drum, and the clarinet responds with quick figuration, very virtuosic, and everything calms down by the end. It's got a lovely, placid ending. You want to say anything about that?
I liked all the contrasts in the movements and the sort of contrasts in there with the low strings against the clarinet, and then in the third movement there's a sort of bassoon part over a pizzicato kind of string plucking, and then the fourth movement those kind of intense string lines, and then the quirky snare kind of thing. The clarinet parts are really interesting and virtuosic. I guess I preferred the orchestrations from the flute concerto we heard earlier, but as I said, I wondered if this was first composed as, you know, a work for piano, and then he worked the orchestrations out from there, and that's why it seems to have a different quality to me, or not. But I thought the orchestration is not quite as compelling as the flute concerto, but as a vehicle for clarinet, and then sort of the quirkiness and sudden changes. It's kind of an interesting piece that draws you into what's going on.
Yeah, I feel like the flute concerto is a little more like on the surface. It's sort of about a rather kind of comical situation, whereas this one's about something a little more serious. Like this person has like a sort of mental disorder, and he is being portrayed in this. I find this work hard to absorb. Like I listen to it again and again. It's all one movement, and it kind of doesn't stick with me. I like it, but it's a harder work to sort of absorb, I think.
Yeah.
It might just be its theme as well. It's a little hard, you know. It's sort of dense, but enjoyable. Let's just say that. Okay, tracks 6 through 10. Witold Lutosławski, Polish composer from the 20th century. A lot of composers from the 20th century went the 12-tone and serial route, but there were composers from the post-war era who didn't want to go that way, and they had to develop their own ideas. One of them was George Ligeti, and he had a lot of humor in his music and sort of, investigated different things like microtones and rhythms and things like that. And another composer like that was Lutosławski, who developed these aleatoric techniques where he would have these parts written that you could play whenever you wanted, sort of. So the musicians or the conductor had to decide when they were going to be played. We're not hearing any of that in this piece. This is called Dance Preludes for Clarinet Solo, Percussion, Harp, Piano, and Strings, 1954. We're hearing the first arrangement of this from 1955, and there was another orchestra arrangement in 1959. We're hearing the earlier one because the clarinet is really the solo instrument there. The 1959 arrangement passes the clarinet's line between instruments more, so he wanted to have this one as a clarinet solo. Now, this isn't one of Lutosławski's more demanding works because it belongs to the folk-based area of his output, composed when he was in Warsaw, which was under Soviet rule, and he wrote these works to appease the censors. The Soviet Union censored everything, and they wanted music that was going to appeal to the people. It turns out, again, it's one of his most popular works. I mean, that always happens. And the melodies are all Lutosławski's creations, but they're written in a folk idiom. All right, it's 5 movements. They're all very brief. It's not a very long work. It's fairly lightweight. Surprising for Lutosławski. It just shows what he's capable of. I just wrote notes like it's pretty. There's an appoggiatura melody in the 3rd movement, which means like sort of a leaping down from a higher note to a lower one. The andante starts with a thumping bass and upward piano figures. It's a little dark and mysterious, and the last movement has a repeating folk melody, and it's rather fast. It's enjoyable, really, for the clarinet's playing, and it's an immediately appealing work. It's just very, very short. Each movement is around 2 minutes long, so it goes by fairly quickly. Okay, last we have Aaron Copland, American composer, Concerto for Clarinet and String Orchestra with Harp and Piano. This was written in 1948 for Benny Goodman, the jazz clarinetist, and it was premiered by Goodman in 1950. It draws heavily on jazz styles, but they're not terribly noticeable as far as I'm concerned. I don't know. You can hear them in there, but it doesn't feel like a jazzy work like a Gershwin work would be. This is the original version. Goodman, when he premiered the work, he made some amendments because he wanted to, be able to play everything, I guess. I think the Copland's original writing was a little too demanding in parts. But we're hearing the original version that Copland wrote here. Okay. The first movement is called Slowly and Expressively, or labeled Slowly and Expressively. It's a slow lyrical melody and that emerges from a slow rocking rhythm, and it really stays that way. We don't hear the clarinet do much in this movement besides carry the slow-moving melodic material, so I guess it's showing off tone here. The second movement is a cadenza, very short. It's a minute. It's almost 2 minutes long, very brief. It starts slowly, sort of like where the first movement left off, and then picks up energy. The cadenza uses the whole range of the instrument. Okay, so we hear it ends with a scale from the low to the high end. And then the third movement, marked rather fast, has kind of a ticking rhythm to it. I like the piano's contribution to the overall sound in this movement a lot. The rhythm abruptly changes around the 2-minute 45-second mark to something a little more angular. It sounds to me like the orchestra is high in the mix in this. The clarinet's melody has a jazz type sort of feel to it, but it doesn't really sound like jazz. And the accompaniment, it's jazzy in that it has like a swing rhythm, but it doesn't really sound like jazz, despite being relatively slow. We hear the clarinet at its piercing high end very often in this movement. Sparovek's sound is appealing, even in this harsh register. And I love the ending, which honks on some of the instrument's lower notes, then glissandos upward. It's kind of cool. Anyway, that's the end of this album. It was really enjoyable as well, and this is another one I'd like to hear again and again.
Yeah, both these are kind of interesting. The Lutosławski, I guess I liked the fifth one in that series the best, or fourth. I like the fourth one best, although the fifth one has a lot of rhythmic, interesting things.
The fourth one was the longest one, so it's kind of you had a chance to actually grab it. Something like this is going to happen in the jazz releases too. You know which one I'm talking about.
Yeah, and the Copland. The first theme is just really lovely. The sort of warm string tones and the slow waltz, and then but then those high tones. This must be really challenging for the average player to keep that sounding, nice with those,
right.
beautiful melodic parts in the first movement there. The second movement is kind of dancing with interesting rhythm changes, and then that ending with those register changes, and then
right.
the real high reaches at the real end.
Right.
It's like you could make or break that. Whatever
right.
happens on those, but
that's the last thing you hear. If you miss that, you kind of pretty embarrassed, because that's how the piece ends.
It does get really edgy, but he keeps it within that realm of tonal centeredness there. So it's a nice piece.
I think the high end of the clarinet and the really wailing high end comes from like the jazz of the era where clarinetists used to play way up there. Just kind of like make that sound.
Yeah.
Kind of like, here I am.
Yeah.
All right. It's actually a nice transition this week. We have sort of a jazzy ending, and we're going to
jazz. And matching the wind theme, I picked a woodwind combination of things here, beginning with a player that I didn't know anything about. And so I had seen his name floating about, and so I thought I'd pick up on this one to check it out for myself. And so I'm not actually sure how to read the title.
Yeah, me neither.
Because
I looked it up. It looks like it's probably Three Bird? Is this
Three
the one you're talking about?
But before the three is that sort of a less than.
Yeah, so it's sort of a, what do you call it, an emoticon
kind of thing.
Yeah, because I think it's supposed to be like breasts or something. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Unless it's
the three is like the
thing.
The heaviest of the breasts or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be.
But they said on the internet it was listed as, people who wrote about it as Three Bird. I can't imagine that's what it's called though.
Three Bird. This is by the tenor saxophonist and clarinetist Kevin Sun. It's on Endectomorph Music. That's an interesting title. Like the body types, you got the endomorph.
That's a more interesting name than the album's title.
Yeah. Anyway, Kevin Sun, I don't know much about him. There's not a lot about his background, but he's playing out of New York City. I assume he's Chinese American, because in addition to playing in the U.S., he's also performed in China, and he is the artistic director of the Blue Note China Jazz Orchestra.
Oh, cool.
So what drew me to this album, Bird being the affectionate nickname for the great bebop jazz alto saxophonist pioneer Charlie Parker, as all jazz fans will know. And last year, 2020, was the 100th anniversary of Charlie Parker's birth. Over the years, we've seen a lot of tributes to Charlie Parker by various players. And then last year, we had mentioned this album on Smoke Sessions Records, Bird at 100. And so this is sort of 100 years plus one, one extra year. And Kevin Sun has done interesting sort of tribute on his own, more from the composer's point of view. And so what he's done is he's taken various Charlie Parker compositions and solos and used them as inspiration to sort of reimagine and rework various aspects of Charlie Parker's music in a modern jazz context. And so you have to have that sort of background and situational awareness, I think, to get the most out of this album. So probably
But even if you don't, I think you'll still kind of get something out of it. It's a very quirky album.
Yeah, it's quirky. But if you know Charlie Parker's music, you'll have a deeper meaning. And if you don't, it's a good chance to go back and investigate one of the greatest innovators of jazz who really changed the whole direction and concept of jazz music. On this album, we've got Kevin Sun on tenor sax and clarinet, and he also varies up the instrumentation depending on what he's aiming for. Here on some of the tracks, we've got Adam O'Farrell on trumpet, Max Light on guitar on 3 tracks, and then we've got on piano and Fender Rhodes, Christian Lee, and Walter Stinson on bass, and Matt Honor on drums. And the first track on here is called Greenlit, and this borrows the harmonic progressions from Charlie Parker's famous Confirmation, but it sort of adds this is from the album notes. He says he adds an oscillating metrical form and a new melody. And so the new melody is interesting, and they make it weave sort of between the sax and the trumpet, and there's no piano on here. However, if you know the chord changes, if jazz fans who know Confirmation, you'll know the harmony, the changes to this tune. You can follow them along easily in the bass. Everyone takes a turn at soloing on here, and the new drum beat gives it an unusual kind of challenging feel. So it's kind of interesting. Next is 2 tracks, sort of a part 1 and part 2 called Adroitness, and this is based on another famous Charlie Parker tune, Dexterity. Part 1 focuses on the melody of that composition, and then 2 is a rhythmic focus. Sun switches to clarinet here, which makes a really interesting tonal blend with the Fender Rhodes that is put on part 1. And so that's sort of just a melodic exposition. And then part 2 begins with a very syncopated rhythm behind the melody, and it gets kind of swinging then under Sun's solo, where he switches to sax for the second part. And then the same pattern is repeated for the piano solo, the changing rhythm. And Lee gets some kind of new, different harmonic ideas into that. So kind of an interesting exposition on another well-known Parker tune. Track 4 is called Composite, and this features, from his description, drums along a thickening web of melodies derived from 4 Parker blues compositions. And what you actually hear in this is kind of a meandering Rhodes piano line, and it gets topped with clarinet melodies again, that combination of tones, and they become more bluesy in a Charlie Parker sort of concept of the blues fashion as it goes along over the drumming. 5 is Onomatopoeia, and this kind of brings together 2 minor key touchstones from Parker's playing. This would be actually a Dizzy Gillespie's tune that Parker was also known to play on, bebop, and Charlie Parker's Segment. And this one, we get guitar joining in, Max Light, with a really reverby, cool tone, and then Sun sax, and it's a real fast swinging bop treatment, and the guitar and sax solos are really fluid and really bop style. So this one's got a lot of fun and energetic tune. 6 is Dovetail, and this is called an abstract dance through Parker's 2 studio take improvisations on Yardbird Suite. And so, obviously Sun is really familiar with all of Parker's recordings. They're even going through the various takes and things of extra solos and things that are available. Here, Sun is back on clarinet, and Lee comes in in the background with some really dissonant harmonies on the piano, and then Lee takes over and develops some new kind of themes, and then Sun comes back in with a second theme, and Elise solos again with a lot of harmonic liberties, and he's on clarinet, and then Sun comes back in, but this time on tenor, and things stay kind of abstract, and he makes a surprise switch again to clarinet for the ending. So it sort of keeps you guessing as they move around. I guess that's the idea of Dovetail, putting together these 2 different takes. 7 is called Cheroot, and this is kind of an extended dialogue with the trio over, they call it an accent map drawn from the tune She Wrote, and so transformed into Schrute. So it's just sax, piano, and drums, and it's a very short piece, kind of working out just this kind of composed, accented, syncopated rhythm thing. There's not a lot of improvisation going on over that.
Yeah, so they're making a joke on the title. Cheroot is like a cigarette,
right?
Sort of, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so
okay.
She Wrote to Cheroot's. She wrote.
I get it.
Wrote, actually, it was wrote, Rote, which kind of derivative anyway. But then it's Cheroot. Yes, they're taking some liberties with that, as they do with track 8.
Sounds Chinese.
This was really interesting, yeah, in a couple ways. So the composition Dewey Square, Dewey, and this is changed to Chinese Du Yi, Duy's choir, and
Y-I.
Y-I, and this is said reimagines Dewey Square through the lens of the mysterious introduction from the studio master take. So I guess that's another extra take. Anyway,
I don't even know these recordings.
Yeah.
I've heard. I don't know the Charlie Parker
Dewey
recordings
Square
terribly well, but I know I've
right.
heard them. Yeah, so
Anyway, we get a little treat here. So Sun plays the kind of Chinese pipes. Wind instrument called the sheng.
Yeah.
And so he
I was
comes
wondering
in,
what that was. Actually,
he comes in with that, and it's sort of, it's dual tonality. It's sort of out there compared to what else is being played. And that combined with the guitar, it's really kind of otherworldly effect at the beginning. But then it gets kind of cool. Honor cooks up some complex beat for the melody, and he keeps it mixed up throughout the tune between this even beat and then swinging. And you can follow his drumming through the guitar and sax solos on this tune. It's really intricate. The solos here are really melodic and kind of nostalgic, harkening back to earlier eras of jazz, and they complement the sweet melody, which is really in contrast to the otherworldly intro. And then Sun gives you a little bit more of the sheng at the end to take it out in the same manner that he brought it in. So yeah, this one is really reimagined. Track 9 is Bigfoot, and this is a classic Parker groove that I guess classic Parker tune with a new groove, was variously titled Drifting on a Reed, Air Conditioner, or Giant Swing. It's a slow sax blues over fast, even bass lines in the piano and bass that are doubled. And then it hits this sort of rising line sort of progression, and the sax joins in with that for a while. Then they settle on a more regular groove for the head again. There's a longer piano solo by Lee. Sun takes a sax solo. He keeps it kind of bluesy and works well with the groove. And then they hit that unison ascending lines and riff again to take the tune out. Track 10 is Sturgis, and this is based on Parker's recorded improvisations on the tune Mohawk. O'Farrell is back on trumpet on this track, and it's just bass and drums. The arrangement is fun. There's a lot of pauses in the lines, and if you listen closely, you'll hear Sun get some cool overtone notes. And as the lines sort of go in multiple registers, they hit some unison high notes together really well. So it's kind of a fun little playing on this Mohawk improvisation. 11 and 12 is a new kind of exploration from the original Parker tune Scrapple from the Apple. This is called Chapel from the Appel. And it explores rhythmic implications in the introduction to Scrapple from the Apple. And apparently this is...
He says rhythmic implications. What does that mean? It's like whatever he wants it to be.
I guess, yeah. Supposedly this is this in the album notes says a nod to both Phil Schaap and the misspelling on the Happy Bird LP. So apparently there's a mistake on the album cover.
This guy's a real nerd.
Yeah, he is. He's a bird nerd.
He's got all these records, like, yeah.
So here we get O'Farrell with a nice cup-muted trumpet intro that he gets some kind of microtonal things going in the pitches that are kind of cool, and the intro section. And then he keeps the mute in, and Sun comes in on clarinet, and we've got bass and drums again on the second half of this. And then Stinson has a nice bass solo, and O'Farrell gets a rhythmic trumpet solo that keeps the charm of the muted tone. Track 13 is actually a Dizzy Gillespie tune, famous tune, Salt Peanuts. And of course, Parker played on this tune often a lot. And this one is very similar. It's kind of recorded like the one of the original versions. This actually says in the notes, it mirrors the 1945 Guild recording, but they do change it up a little bit with a few extra beats, which, if you know the kind of, it's very famous, but you'll recognize that they rework the melody lines a little bit. And the solos go through Lee, Sun, O'Farrell, and they have some interesting rhythmic and tempo changes behind the soloists, keeps them on their toes. But Stinson and Honor mix it up, but they stay really locked together, so that the time changes behind their solos, and that it keeps it kind of fresh, and they're having a lot of fun here. Then track 14 is called Ark's Peel, and this is based on Parker's studio improvisations on Scrapple from the Apple. And Sun is on clarinet here, just over bass and drums, and it's just a very short take based on this one improvisation of Parker. 15, this one I'm not really had to read this a few times. This is actually a Charlie Parker album, which is named from a tune, Clact Ovisids Tene. And this tune is called Tauk Overseed Nete. All right. And actually,
or something like that.
Yeah. So apparently, this is another one, I guess, that the track was actually written wrong because as someone says that Charlie Parker's handwriting was misread for what the tune should be called or something. Anyway, Light comes back on guitar on this one. And here, Sun has a lighter and more flowing tenor tone on this tune, and Stinson gets a nice bass solo spot. And this is the last tune on the album. I enjoyed this album. I like this idea for reworking tunes in a modern sense, or taking alternate takes or just solos and expanding upon those ideas. The arrangements are interesting. Choosing not to have piano on some tunes, or having the guitar, the Rhodes and clarinet tones together. So the instrumentation and arrangement choices are fresh. I think it'll be of most interest to people who are familiar with Charlie Parker's recording, so they have a jumping point to get to what Sun is presenting here. But maybe even if you don't know Parker's music, you'll find this one kind of interesting and amusing.
Yeah, one of the things that I kind of pulled out of this record is I said it was very quirky. A lot of the tracks are like a minute and a half, 2 minutes long. They don't really, so it constantly keeps your attention by constantly changing, even within longer tracks. Like the rhythm will suddenly change, and it almost feels like as soon as your short American attention span starts drifting away, it just does something to pull you back. Yeah. It's almost like it's calculated to do that. So I found myself like, always kind of like being brought back in when my mind started to drift and things like that. I thought that was a really interesting approach to these tunes.
What I like about it is, of course in jazz you have the jazz standard, which
right.
Is a body of the American songbook, songs that players have played, since the Tim Pan Alley age of great composing, and that are still played today. And all jazz musicians are expected to know them. And, most jazz releases will have at least one or two standards, and new players are expected to come up playing those and show, that they understand the tradition and hopefully bring something new to them. And then, there's kind of a resurgence in new jazz composers composing their own new works. For better or worse, there's some great new composers, groups like the New Composers Octet and players like that. Sometimes you'll get people who jump off too soon with all of their own compositions. So it's nice to see, sort of for up-and-coming players to have a balance of standards and new things. And then it's always nice to see players go back and revisit great compositions from their mentors. So we've seen Brian Lynch's Latin reinterpretation of Woody Shaw's tunes, right?
Yeah,
and those kind of things are really cool. But this is also a cool idea for someone to go back on sort of a micro level, and take not just play Charlie Parker tunes, but look at small parts of them and segments and things that they found interesting. So I think it's a valid approach and something that goes to a little bit more depth on the jazz composition level. And, I think it brings out some interesting ideas. So
he certainly loves his Charlie Parker.
I think he's also done a Lester Young sort of exposition too. So I might look that up to check out next about Kevin's son. So we'll be seeing what he does next. The next album is by female saxophonist Nicole Glover, who we heard before on episode 23 as a guest on Art Hirahara's album. And she's got her new release out on the Savant label called Strange Lands, which is produced by trumpet great Jeremy Pelt, and also features the wonderful jazz pianist who we've also heard on the program, George Cables, on several tracks. And so this album came out based on a theme inspired by the experience of the new reality of COVID. I watched an interview with her, and so it's kind of a science fiction-based theme in this new otherworldly reality we're in. And so that's how she chose the tunes and standards to fit in with that. And so we've got here Nicole Glover on tenor sax, Daniel Duke on bass, and Nick Cacioppo on drums. And George Cables on a few tracks, which I'll point out. It begins with the title track, Strange Lands. And this one starts out with Cacioppo's drums that beat us in. Glover takes off over the real up-tempo beat. Her tenor tone is really thick, and she plays aggressively. There's no piano or harmonic instrument in here, so this sort of trio idea that goes back to maybe Sonny Rollins was the one who worked the most with this, gives the sax player a lot of harmonic freedom. Her lines are melodic and sometimes bluesy in here. She gets some high register honks in as well as she trades off with the drums. It's a real high energy first cut, and she shows a lot of aggressiveness in her playing.
Yeah, hyperactive drumming too. This guy really makes a statement as well.
He beats it out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an exciting track. I thought this was a great opener.
Yeah. Don't think that it's a female sax player. There's going to be some girly playing or something. No, she really.
Nope, not here.
No, not at all. Two is a original by the bass player Daniel Duke called Hive Queen. Like that title. This one starts with a hypnotic alternating bass riff, and then we get a little bit of George Cables on this one. He comes in, and he gets the first solo. He plays kind of inspired lines over the interesting chord changes here. Glover is next. She blows really hard and hot. Gets some nice low fat tones in her solo too. Duke takes a solo too on his own tune. This one keeps up the high energy feeling set so far. 3, Otherworldly, The Twilight Zone. This one has another bass intro. The drums join in for a medium tempo, and Glover introduces the minor melody. She's more relaxed here in tone and phrasing to start out. She builds the intensity through her solo with a lot of fast lines, trills, bent notes, and Duke takes more of a leisurely solo here.
Around the middle, she's got some good ideas too in her solos. Really enjoyed this. So up to this point, I'm really enjoying this album, by the way. So
up to this point, okay.
Let's get to the next track.
Yeah, I think this is where she shines in this sort of expansive trio format, where she has a lot of freedom.
Right.
Then we change pace to get a little more melancholy with the Hobeam tune Jinji, and she shows her more lyrical side on this slower tune. There's a lot of space here with just the trio format, and it shows off Duke's bass tone and touch really nicely. But she's really Glover's in a more laid-back mode here.
Yeah, I think she went for something more atmospheric here than really heartfelt.
Right.
And for that reason, I didn't really think that this interpretation came off, because I know this song from the Francis Albert Sinatra and Antonio Carlos Jobim album.
Right.
And he does this really this really heartfelt vocal on that. It comes across very well, and I just kind of felt like there was. I guess I had that in my head. I felt like there was something missing here. It didn't really feel like a bossa nova tune, and I don't know. I just kind of I didn't feel like she got the sensitivity required. Let's say.
I think it may be hard to really get a full bossa nova feel without a chordal instrument, because the bossa nova, of course, the bass is outlining the chords, but bossa nova needs maybe those unique chords voiced more. I mean, I'm imagining them, but it's different from hearing them on a guitar or something. That could be part of it.
Okay.
5 is called Parks. This is another Cacioppo original. This is a kind of a angular post-bop melody, and Glover really kind of has a free exploration on this one. Also gives Cacioppo a chance to solo on here too.
She's really good here. She's really good on these like more aggressive sounds. She's got this really muscular sort of approach.
Yeah, she does. Aggressive and free blowing range really fits her personality well, as it does on the next tune. Another Cacioppo original called The Switch, and this one has kind of. It's a fluttering figure that modulates as the basis for the melody. I guess that's the switch. And so this gives her also a lot of room to explore this sort of modulating figure. And so she's really fast-fingered in this one in her solo. And Duke as well on the bass. While he goes through his solo, he's able to maintain this sort of bouncing rhythm that this tune has. So it's got a lot of motion to it. It has that sort of inherent tension in the head with that alternating thing that you're able to build a lot of ideas out of for the solos. And the last 3 tracks bring George Cables back. Another Cacioppo original, Notturno. This one has a baseline intro. It kind of made me imagine like someone sneaking up at you at night, like running in between trees and pausing.
Yeah, I kind of wrote like a detective movie groove. Yeah.
Running along. Although once the tune gets going, it has a nice melody with a lot of harmonic movement. This is a really nice original tune. Good composing I don't want to say from a drummer, because you usually don't think of drummers as having these really developed melodic or harmonic senses, but this tune does have it. Glover keeps it bluesy in her solo, and Cables has kind of special touch that he always has with a tasty solo in here. And then Glover comes back with another solo that has a really, I appreciated the kind of intervals she found to navigate through the chords. I thought that was a nice touch. And then they slow it down at the end, kind of over these rolling toms from Cacioppo, and Glover takes it out with a sultry cadenza. And we end the album with two standards. A Flower is a Lovesome Thing, Billy Strayhorn, a pretty intro from Cables. Glover comes in with a kind of new breathy tone that's very nice, and it's just the two of them for the whole tune. They leave a lot of space, nice gentle treatment. I really like the unhurried tempo. It's not rubato, but it could be at any moment. It's that kind of, hanging tempo that Cables is able to pull off with his relaxedness. And that also enables Glover to be really relaxed and melodic. And Cables shows his trademark touch and sense of dynamics that he can pull off in a solo. Really nice duo piece. And 9, the Cole Porter tune, I Concentrate on You. The bass walks into the tune with a medium swing, and they give this one just a straight-ahead treatment. Glover keeps her solo really loose and low, emphasis on swinging melodic playing. Cables gets inside of the tune. As these kind of standards, he knows inside and out, so he can find all the cool kind of, leading tones and the harmonies. And his solo has some cool, inventive ascending phrases in it. Duke gets a brief bass solo as well. And then Cables kind of weaves a nice slowed down ending bouquet of sounds with some final flourishes to finish out the album. So, it's always great to hear George Cables because he's such a master, with so much experience. I particularly like all the recordings he did accompanying Art Pepper. He's a fine accompanist, and when he has his chance to solo, it's always beautiful. And it was nice for Glover to feature him here. However, I feel for her, her meat is her trio sort of setting. I think that open format without a harmonic instrument inspires her and brings out the kind of the fire and youthful energy in her playing. She feels a bit confined to me in a regular kind of full ensemble. So I feel like there's two sort of energies on this album on here. And so I liked her more in that, sort of uninhibited kind of trio format. So I imagine that's what we're going to hear more from her in the future. And I think she'll break some, stereotypes of, sort of female sax players or,
And there are quite a few of them out there now.
There's quite a few of them.
Yeah.
I think she's got one of the best kind of edges and aggressive kind of concepts that I've heard. And I like it. And I think she's got these guys as a trio seem to really lock in together with that kind of element. So I liked what I heard here a lot more. I wasn't so sold on what she contributed to the Art Hirahara album. But I thought, I'll check out, what she does. And I really liked what I heard here. And I was happy to hear George Cables too, but I would have liked to actually maybe heard it as two separate albums, like with a complete kind of a quartet, and then more of her with her trio too.
Well, I feel like she's best not only with the trio, but in the more aggressive pieces. She really seems to shine there. She gets this big muscular tone. She's got a lot of energy.
Yeah.
But I feel like she sounds kind of restrained in the slower works. We mentioned Gingy, and I also in A Flower Is a Lovesome Thing. It's a really familiar melody, but I didn't get this sense of that it wasn't really like tugging at the heartstrings the way it could. She's kind of it's almost like she wants to be aggressive. She doesn't really like this the ballads, the way she has to kind of like lay back for the ballad. You know what I mean?
I think it's a personality thing. There's some players who never play aggressive, but they have that sort of how can I say? It's sort of subsumed or something. It's restrained into that sort of restrained style. Yeah. And there's something more implied. And I don't feel she has that sense because she's much better at when she's playing, unrestrained out there.
Yeah, you can actually hear, too, that she's really enjoying
that's
it more,
what she's
too.
comfortable with. So I don't think she's by nature a restrained player, although she's, holding back in that sense. Oh, maybe as time goes on and she, matures into that too. It's not that she can't play restrained, but you feel like she's not giving her true
heart's
nature
not in it
that,
really, kind of. It's
that kind of thing.
Or something.
Yeah, some players play better in certain sort of atmospheres than others. So we'll have to see what she does next. But definitely, she's got the chops and
absolutely,
she's got the edge for that more expressive stuff. So let's see what.
And she's got a drummer she should stick with because that guy and her seem to really have a similar kind of energy and
the good energy there too. Yeah. So, enjoyable. Let's see what she does next. And to round out a name that's well known in the jazz world that I've known for a while. Normally, I don't always pick up on the big names. I like to highlight some new things, but I was interested to see what this one would be. It's been getting a lot of attention. The alto saxophonist Kenny Garrett, with his release, Sounds from the Ancestors on Mack Avenue Records. And so he kind of burst out in the 1970s. And as a player who played with Art Blakey, Miles Davis, I came to know Kenny Garrett back when I was a youngster in high school with his work in the 80s with Freddie Hubbard and Woody Shaw on the two albums they did together. And I also have the first album he did as a leader, introducing Kenny Garrett. I think this was 1985. And Garrett's always had a distinctive kind of tart alto tone with a fiery concept, borrowing a lot from a jazz tradition. Also a modern approach, sort of taking John Coltrane's concept and being able to do those ideas on alto sax and a lot of other influences too. So I've always been a big fan of his playing, and he's recorded a lot of his own, I think maybe 20 albums of his own over the years. And so here he gets a new sort of concept album, I guess you could say, Sounds from the Ancestors. This is described as remembering the spirit of the sounds of African ancestors from church services, recited prayers, songs from the work fields, Yoruban chants and African drums, and lots of other things mixed together. So it's a lot of big ideas.
Can I say, though, my impression of listening to this album, that he's also being very inspired by like a lot of the jazz and funk that was around in the 1970s, because a lot of these tracks kind of reminded me of that era.
Well, yeah, they all have kind of different dedications to them.
Right.
The core group is Garrett's regular group, I guess, with him on alto sax, Vernell Brown Jr. on piano, Corcoran Holt on bass, Ronald Bruner drums, Rudy Bird on percussion. There's a host of other people who appear on here. Dwight Tribble, John Baylor, Lenny Smith, Chris Ashley, Anthony Scheherazade Holman on vocals. Guest appearances from drummer Lenny White, pianist and organist Johnny Mercier, trumpeter Maurice Brown, conguero Pedrito Martinez, bata percussionist Dreiser Druthi, other singers Dwight Tribble, Jean Baylor, Lenny Smith, Chris Ashley, Anthony, and on a couple of the cuts, Garrett plays piano and sings himself. So there's a lot of things going on here.
Yeah, and, before you go to the music too, I want to talk about the album cover, which I really like a lot. I think it's a really attractive cover. It's in bright African colors, and it's sort of like a drawing of him playing the saxophone, and there's sort of like a water behind him, which is below the waist of this kind of boy African ancestral type figure who's blowing inspiration into his ear, and he's playing, and out of the saxophone are coming all these sort of colors and fish and things like that.
It's a cool album cover.
It's a really intriguing piece of art.
Yeah. I have to say, well, maybe I'll say when I get to the end, I liked it better as it went along, but I wasn't sold from the beginning.
Although I did like the opening track with the Latin groove. I thought that was really cool.
Well, let's go through it. The first one is called It's Time to Come Home. And this is in an Afro-Cuban style, probably inspired from the playing that Garrett did with Chucho Valdez.
Right.
So you've got that Cuban groove. Bass and piano keep the groove with some tight Latin percussion. Garrett plays the melody and he solos, gets outside of the chords for a bit of tension, but he mostly stays subtle. And this one has some added female vocals peppered in, but then it sort of gets into this section where Garrett sort of turns rhythmic, and he kind of goes through this section of repeated kind of breathy honks and subtones on a percussive thing. Well, that went on a bit long for my taste, and then towards the end we get some recitation and vocalization that's performed by Dwight Tribble in the Yoruba language over the percussion. I was waiting for more saxophone because it's Kenny Garrett.
What was weird about this track is, I hate to jump to the end, but they repeat this track at the end. There's another version of it, and I liked that. I like that version a lot better, actually.
Well, actually, it's the same exact version without the vocals.
Oh, really?
It's the same track, yeah.
Maybe it was because maybe the saxophone was just easier to hear or something, because I felt like, I don't know, although maybe after everything had come, I kind of changed.
But it's basically without the vocals, yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Track 2 is Hargrove, and this is a tribute to the late Roy Hargrove, who passed away a year or so ago. This is an R&B groove, and this is very reminiscent of the groove that Hargrove used for some of his tunes on the Ear Food recording, if you've heard that one.
Great title.
Yeah, it's a really nice album. The sax and the trumpet share the melody. There's some kind of female backing vocals oohing added in here. And then the sax and trumpet trade of some phrases over the backing vocals, which are repeating "A Love Supreme," because an ode to John Coltrane. You can get a taste of Garrett's trademark tone, but still there weren't any solos here. So by this point, I was getting a little bit disappointed that this is too much sizzle and no steak.
Yeah, there's a lot of sizzle. There's a lot of grooving, and there's a lot of he's kind of doing this a lot of honking as well, which I kind of think is kind of cool. I really like it, but I know you're waiting for that solo.
I'm waiting for that, and I didn't get it in the next track either. Number 3, when the
it kind of moves like a fusion record a little bit.
Yeah, when the days were different. This is like a modern gospel progression. It's an uplifting piano part.
This is a different pianist on this. This is Johnny Mercier.
He's got that
playing
kind
on
of
this.
touch that reminds me of Chuck Leavell even on those Southern rock kind of recordings. But then behind that, there's a nice organ wash, like, church organ. I get some background ooze that come in and some more vocalization. At around 3 minutes, there's some more vocals, and Garrett finally picks up his sax and plays. He weaves some bluesy, gospel-y phrases around the repeating gospel patterns. This is all cool. And the ending distills down to just voice and sax. You get that organ bass pedals and chords. Kind of repetitive, gospel-y thing. Now the album starts to give me the steak that I was waiting for.
All right,
here.
They're just serving an appetizer to begin.
It's called For Art's Sake. It's a busy drum beat intro, and its tune is a tribute to Art Blakey and Tony Allen, jazz drummers. This one's got some electric piano backing in it that adds a kind of thick wash, but there's also acoustic piano in here, so you get these layers of keyboards. There's a lot of things going on rhythmically with the keyboard there. Garrett takes a solo, picking up on the fast figure from the melody, includes a lot of other fast figures and interesting harmonics. And there's an electric piano solo while Garrett adds some backing lines, and get to shift to some drumming features while the keyboards keep the chords going. I'm starting to get more drawn in at this point. 5, What Was That? This one is a cool kind of polyrhythm and moving harmonic vehicle. The bass keeps things anchored throughout the tune, while Garrett gets some real space to finally open up with his solo. He's got a few kind of Love Supreme type interval melodic things, nods in a phrase in here. Very cool rhythmic piano solo, and the percussion takes us out over some riffing in the rhythm section and sax. Track 6, Soldiers of the Fields, or Soldats des Champs. This is a dual tribute to jazz musicians who kept the music alive, and also Haitian soldiers who fought against the French during the Haitian Revolution. This one is made up from a cool modulating motif-based tune that has kind of a marching military beat to it. So the rhythm is really unique. And it actually kind of switches into 2 different sections. So Garrett's really inspired in his solo over this kind of moving harmonic cycle here. And the piano solo is quite energetic too, which navigates these harmonies, but also gets some cool new rhythmic ideas in the piano solo. About halfway through the song, a new melodic theme emerges, and it's outlined by Garrett. And there's a kind of a new beat that has these pressing accents. Some notes I saw said it's a Guadeloupean beat, although I'm not familiar how that's distinctive, but it's a different kind of feel from the kind of martial military beginning of the tune. Some more extended kind of keyboard chords in the second half, and this really push Garrett into sort of Coltrane-like harmonic explorations in this one. These are really expansive kind of things. And then after he's like played all the notes you can imagine from this sort of mode in there, he gets in some cool squawks and shrieks on the saxophone for, just some more emotional expression. And when he's got all that, he dials it down a bit, and then it's over to the piano for another solo and ending on the second kind of theme. And it ends with kind of punctuated phrases together. So, yeah, this one was sort of what I've been waiting for in terms of soloing and expression. Finally, 7, Sounds from the Ancestors, title track. This one starts with Garrett on piano, playing a somber theme.
And this is fine. We finally get a chance to rest a little bit here because it's been full on, right?
It's full on.
Rhythmically right up to this point.
And so you get this somber theme on the piano that suddenly hits this phrase that turns rhythmic. These vocal cries from Tribble come in, and you've got these Yoruban lyrics from Pedrito, and this is supposedly paying respect to Orunmila, the deity of wisdom. Garrett joins in on sax, and now he's newly inspired to blow over the rhythmic and vocal soundscape that's going on there.
I should mention the piece picks up after the opening piano. It doesn't stay quiet.
This rhythm, And it goes on and on, but then the celebration kind of ends suddenly, and Garrett tags on a kind of short reprise of the opening theme, so it's kind of sandwiched in the melancholy kind of piano piece. And then the final track is...
I mentioned this already.
Same as the original track, It's Time to Come Home Again. And I believe this is just the same track without the added vocals.
I did like this better, though. I stand by that.
Yeah, well, I could hear the sax more. So, I guess it's an interesting concept album. I mean, it's a lot of it's an exploration of African-derived influences, that came directly from Africa through the Caribbean, through the church and other things. I just thought that in some of the earlier tracks, there's kind of more, ambiance sizzle than steak if you're looking for Garrett's signature sax soloing. But maybe at this point in his career, he didn't need to do a straight-ahead blowing album, and he wanted to sort of create a musical soundscape in order to set his playing into. And I thought that the second half of it made up for that and satisfied me with more of his trademark virtuosity and intensity of sax playing. So, worth a listen. I'm sure this one's going to get a lot of attention and probably going to win some awards. I liked it overall, but
I did too. I liked the high energy of it. It really just pulled me in, and I was really kind of enthralled by it, really right to the end. It's very repetitive. A lot of the patterns repeat very often, but that's not a problem, and we hear that a lot in popular music. But here it's kind of
it'll have a lot of pop appeal.
I liked it. I liked it. It was enthralling rhythmically, so I think that's why I liked the energy of it all. It was really great, and of course Garrett's soloing as well, and his honks and squawks, which I really enjoy hearing.
Yeah. A cry for freedom.
Yep. One day we'll all be free.
Boy, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, I think it's after we die that it happens, though. So
could be. Well,
we'll have to see if we could do that.
Halfway there, beforehand. At least, anyway. So.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Well, me and you are. Some other people have a lot longer ways to go.
They do, and some have gone on before us. So.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, a very windy episode.
Yeah.
Episode 33 of Adult Music. The podcast with music for the mature mind. And autumn is here, and that's going to bring in a lot of good new music.
No, there's already a lot on the back burner that's going to come up pretty soon.
We're heating up some things for next week's episode. And so if you're still with us at this point, thanks for listening. And please do take a moment to comment or subscribe on whatever service you're on. Remember, if you'd like to contact us directly, please don't hesitate. Our email address, adultmusicpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And we're going to see you again next week. I think we might have some bigger sounds brewing on the back burner.
Yeah, I think I'm planning for some big, how would you say, frequency encompassing sort of
full spectrum.
Full spectrum. There you go. That's what I was looking for.
All right, full spectrum sounds. I've got something to match that as the jazz list grows with lots of summer and early autumn releases. It'll be a good time again next week.
Yeah.
All right. So this has been episode 33 of Adult Music. And
it's been a pleasure.
Yes, it certainly has. So keep blowing in the wind, and we'll see you again next time.